So we didn't plan for this little backdrop, but it gives me a place to rest my arm. Mules and horses. Doesn't matter how I approach this subject, I'm going to make an enemy out of one camp or the other. But I guess the reason you talk to somebody that's been doing it for 50 years almost is they know. In 2000, the year 2000, I was recognized by the Remington Ranch for having trained 2,000 horses. And one of the questions was, well, one of the comments at that place, they gave me a little belt buckle and dinner, and I said, well, that's only half the story. And they said, what do you mean? I says, well, I would say about 1 in 4 of those horses, there was a mule. I don't know what the math on that would be, but you'd have to add another 500 at least. It's a lot of years, you know, it was 20 years. But it's been, what, 23 years since. So how many have I done since that? That was in the year 2000. I don't know. But the lady that did the article on horsemen in the USA, whatever, she spent 2 days with me going out to the coast and 2 days, well, about a day going back to the East Coast. She sent me a letter and says, you are the most prolific horseman in the United States by like 3 times. And I says, what does that mean? He says, by your numbers, because I just gave her my receipt book. By the numbers, you've trained more horses than any man in this country that I've been able to find or interview. And I says, well, that's probably because I'm out training horses while everybody else is doing interviews. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to give you the straight juice on this subject, and you can do with it what you want. Mules. Well, most people know about horses, so I'm not going to tell you about horses. I'm going to tell you about mules, and then you can draw the difference. Solomon had 6,000, I believe the archaeologists say, 6,000 stalls of paired mules for chariots. Now, you can check on that, but Solomon believed, I think there were, and then they give the horses and stuff, but this is a man that had, what, 700 concubines and 300 wives or something like that. David, his dad, was right in that ilk. They were not men that were afraid of numbers, let's just say. But Solomon, in some of the writings that they have of the time, people believe that mules were magic. They said they have a special, you know, you're crossing a donkey on a horse, which is already crossing 2 species. I think they were pretty proud of themselves. That was the first genetically modified horse that was ever made. So historically, they were preferred. We know that because when Absalom went to overthrow his father David in the Bible, it says he went with 50 men mounted on mules, and it specifies. So if you're going to take over the king of Israel, when Israel is the kingdom, you're not going to go on anything but your best. I mean, if we went to take over that kingdom today, we'd take our, well, actually it's still called the cavalry, isn't it? I don't remember what the tank unit is, but I think they call it a cavalry unit. But even though there's not a horse in it. Can't remember how that connection works. But anyway, yeah, we'd take the best war machines we had. They believed that was mules rather than horses, and they had plenty of horses. So in a day when your horse was your everything, that was your mode of transportation, why did they choose mules? Why? Pancho Villa had access to a lot of horses. He was stealing horses, requisitioning horses, conducting a revolution. He rode a mule. Many historians will tell you that George Washington, who is recognized as the father of mules, that's not a good way to say it, but he's the father of the mule movement in the United States. He took a gift of a Catalonian jack, I believe from Spain, and began to breed mules. We recognize him for importing black and tan hounds, some of the first black and tan hounds in the country, but he brought in mules. And the bottom line is once they started to work mules on plantations, they quickly went to mules over horses and oxen. Why? Well, a mule's faster than an ox. It can be ridden a lot more handily than an ox. It doesn't have a cloven foot, so it has a solid foot. which it allows it to put a track in and push. If you've ever seen a pair of draft horses push it, it's great that they don't have a cloven hoof, because if one got purchased and the other one didn't, they split them. Oxen struggle with that sometimes. Anyway, when the Civil War was over, they gave the first compensation, I guess, to the blacks was 20 acres and a mule, something like that. Why did they give him a mule? Well, it was recognized that the mule was the tractor. That's what pulls things. Now, anybody who's ever driven mules, I've driven tons and tons of mules and broke tons and tons of teams of mules. They take a little longer to get there because they're a little harder to persuade, because half of them are an ass. The ass family are the burro family. The desert burro is entirely about self-preservation. So you want to know most about a mule? Study a burro. They're not going to hurt themselves. Why does that serve the outfitter well? Awesome, because you go down the Grand Canyon, you notice there are 200 mules there. Did you see any horses? I once talked to the man. I used to supply mules, one after the other down there. They'd come and buy my broke mules and use them up and bring up the broke down mules, and then I'd break them some more mules. I said, how come you never ask for horses? He says, we don't have a single horse on the ride, not one. In fact, he says, I think it was in the 70s when they quit any horses in the Grand Canyon. And he said most of that is because of insurance. No one will insure a horse in the Grand Canyon. Why? Well, in the heat of the summer, it gets 121 degrees and up in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. You can get a horse to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I've done it lots of times, and I go in cooler times, and I come out. I didn't leave any horses down there. But on those big trail rides where you've got 20 or 40 guests stringing along, you get down there, and most of those rides don't go clear to the water. They go down to a little overlook, and then they turn around and come back, but you just won't get them out because they can't take the heat. The Borax team, was it a 20 mule team? I know they've had a 100 mule team out there to cross the Death Valley. Why didn't they have horses pulling that? The horses won't do it. They can't do it. The desert development, you might say the evolution of the burro or the ass family in the desert has prepared them amply to take heat. One of the things is, you'll notice all desert animals have big ears. A desert fox has these great big ears. A deer in the desert has great big ears. The rats have big ears. You name anything in the desert, it has big ears. The reason why is it exhausts heat. It uses it to expand, to radiate and cool itself in the desert. Even Brahma bulls from the desert. You know, when we want to cross out here in the mountains, if we want something a little bit more desert hardy, we take a Brahma and cross it on an Angus, and we get a Brangus. I could go through all the crosses, but they basically take a Brahma bull, because it has the big ears and the heat tolerance and bug tolerance. They breed it onto a more mountain hardy cow, and anyway, that's why they do it. Well, mules are the equivalent in a horse. You breed to a donkey, number one, you breed a good mare to a donkey, you will get a hybrid vigor. So they're going to be disease resistant, lots better health, they utilize feed better. Talk to anybody that runs mules and horses. Horses are hay burners. They'll just eat that hay and poop it out, and eat that hay and poop it out. The mules make better use of their feed. You get more mileage out of a mule and their feed. I'll give you this example. When the pioneers came from back east and had to cross the Great Plains and end up in the desert, Brigham Young, their leader, after reading the book of Genesis, it says in the book of Genesis that all things have to bring forth seed after their own kind. And that's not what a mule is. He said God made horses and God made asses, but it took a man to make a mule. That was one of his famous quotes. And he absolutely refused to have any mules in his wagon company. Wouldn't allow it. Said, you want to use mules? Go with somebody else. You're not going with me. So when they made their first trek, they made it with oxen and draft horses. But here's an interesting thing. That was in 1847. He personally, Brigham Young, went to the Eagle Gate, where he met every wagon train coming westward every single wagon train coming westward. He would speak to the leaders of the thing, make sure everybody got with a family that could feed them and take care of them, get them on their feet. He would say, you go live with this family, you go live with this family. You know, you've got 25 daughters, we're going to get back to you. Anyway, he met all the wagon companies and he got them placed around. And in that time, he continually watched what was coming in the way of animals and how they looked. The draft horses, I mean, eating, when you're, 30th wagon train behind all these wagon trains coming and all the food's gone, all the firewood's gone, all the feed is gone for all the animals, a lot of the water's gone in the water holes. You got to have something that can make it when there's nothing to make it on. And the draft horses, anybody back east that has that grass to their knees, they know a draft horse does fine back there, but bring a draft horse out to nibble on sagebrush and rocks and see how long they hold up. They don't. They fall apart. Mules will eat sticks. They'll eat bushes. They're like a goat. They've got that burrow mentality. Anybody that's ever had a mule has watched them take their mouth, put it right over a cactus or a thorny bush and just munch it. And you go, how can you do that? Their mouth is made of iron. One of the challenges when you're training mules is they have a hard mouth. So you have to be really sensitive with their mouth when you're training them, because if you start jerking on a mule and sawing a snaffle bit back and forth in there, they get hard mouth and you can't ride them. You can't ride them well. So you want to preserve their mouth. That's just a training tip. When you train mules, you have to be a lot easier on their mouth than you do on horses. And it's counterintuitive because they seem harder and you want to pull harder. Don't. Just be patient. There's a good bell word for you. Patience. Mules require patience. You're used to getting results just like that with a horse. Mules are not as easily persuaded. But once they're persuaded, their memory is so good, they never forget. One of the reasons they like to use them in dude string situations, packing situations, is you can count on them to be pretty consistent. They don't forget. They love routine. The more routine, the better. They like to know where they're going to stand, what you're going to put on them. You'll notice all good packers set their pack saddles to a mule. They get it set for that mule, and then they leave it until that mule's dead. They'll use it every time until they're old mules because they never like to mess with their outfit. There was a man who wrote a book called 1,000 Mules, and it was reported that he had trained 1,000 mules for the military just before they canceled the government remount program, so to speak. Once the cavalry was pretty much done, he was done. But anyway, when he was done, he wrote a book called 1,000 Mules, and there's a ton of information to be gleaned from that, but two things you should learn from that. He said, the horse will go and go and go until he bursts his lung or his heart to serve his master out of loyalty. Horses bond in that way, and they're very good servants and very dutiful. A mule, he said, will only do what's fair. But oftentimes, what a mule considers to be fair is more than what a mule or a horse can do. And that's why people use mules. They can do lots of things. Another thing about mules is, he said in there, a mule will wait 20 years to get even. And that's true. You take a stick and you go beating up a mule, you better know at some point you will be recompensed. They'll pay you back. Now, if you can take a mule from the time they're a baby and raise them up right, and get in their good graces and give them treats and teach them to love you, it's a cakewalk to train mules. They're good. But a lot of times I get mules that have been 3 or 4 years, hadn't have much done with them, and there's only one way to get to the other side of that drama, and that means you've got to pull them where they don't want to be pulled. You got to push them where they don't want to be pushed. You got to pack them with stuff they don't want to pack. The first time you put a elk head on a mule that you're packing, you just better hope it works out and that you know all those really important knots, because you try to half do a packing job on a young mule with horns and those antlers give it a poke one time, get him somewhere, you may be the rest of his life trying to get him over that. So that's not good. Mules remember forever. Mules measure. You'll notice 10 mules tied up to a hitching rail. A little dog, like a Jack Russell, zipping along behind them. they'll put up with it for hours. And that dog will be sitting there passing them, and they'll take their foot right when the dog goes back. They won't kick the dog, they'll just put it back there and measure where that dog was, and then they'll put their foot back. Then the dog will make another pass. Anybody that's ever watched this, it's pretty comical. That mule will put his foot back and just kind of look back and be like, yeah, I think you passed right about there. Then about the 10th pass, that mule will kick that dog like a football, and it'll go sailing over the far fence. And everybody goes, mules are so good at kicking, you know, nothing kicks like a mule. They got all these, if you have a big gun in it and it really kicks, they'll say it kicks like a mule. Why? Well, it isn't that mules kick harder than horses. It's that mules don't ever miss, because mules don't kick at stuff they don't think they're going to hit. That's why they're always paying attention, and they're very contemplative. They'll just sit there, think it's not bothering anybody, then all of a sudden, bow. If you've trained mules, you'll sit there and you'll think, oh, I'll get behind him and I'll do this. Yeah, I'll get behind him and do that. You'll get away with it 5, 6 times. Then all of a sudden they can kick the chain right out of your hand while you're hooking up a log. And you think, you're bent over hooking up a log to pull it out of the forest, and you think, he could have kicked me right in my face. He chose not to. He's like a gunslinger that just shoots the gun out of the guy's hand. You're like, whoa. Mules are very accurate. They don't, and they think about stuff, and they rely heavily on relationships. Like, I don't know if you saw that horse that the other day we had a bunch of guys crossing the river, and they were hikers. They wanted to cross the river, and I said, you're going to get your feet wet, and then you're going to have to hike up that mountain with soggy socks and boots, and you're going to hate it. I said, get on this horse, take him across. When you're done, get off and send him back to me. And they says, that horse isn't just going to come back to you like a dog. And I says, yes, he will. They got on, rode across, tied the reins up, told the horse to come back. Horse came back to me. I put the other one 3 times. He crossed that, and it's a flood stage river running. Horse went back and forth, took everybody across. They got across with dry feet. I got on the horse and went about my business. Later on, they're like, how did you do that? Well, the horse likes me. I've been good to that horse. He's been good to me. We have a good relationship. You do that with a mule, and you have even more reliability. I used to know a guy that had a mule that would pack it with salt, take it to the edge of his property, and turn it loose, and it would go up on the mountain to the sheep herders camp 14, 15 miles at least away on rocky trails. Here would come the mule into camp. Sheep herder would take the mule, tie it up, take those salt rocks off, put his garbage in the panniers, put the stuff he wanted to go back, tie him down, turn him, take him back to the edge of the trail of the meadow, slap him on the rump, old buttons that go down the trail. All the way, you'd see people all the time stopping thinking, somebody needs to catch that mule. Nothing made that guy matter when people messed with his mule. Because if you just leave him alone, he'd go right down, right to the gate, come to the edge of town, come down, you'd see him going, coming, no problem. He'd put supplies on, food, canned goods, flour, send it back up, sheep herder get his stuff. What was really neat is that mule would smell the sheep, so after the mule would go down a couple days later, the sheep would move on up into another grazing meadow. The mule would go back to where the sheep herder was, see that camp was broke and he wasn't there, sniff the sheep, go on up the trail another 2-3 miles. There would be the camp. There'd be the sheep herder. The sheep herder to pull out the grain, give him all the oats he could eat while he was taking his stuff off, turn him around. When he got back, what do you think that rancher did? He gave him more oats and more treats. There's another key to training mules. I find that mules, way more than horses, get into the treats. They like treats. They like licorice flavored. Calf Manna makes a little pellet product I really like, but anything that you can find that they fall in love with, you go out and whistle to your mules, they come running, they make that horrible noise, and they can't whinny and they can't bray, so they just, every mule makes another different noise, none of them the same, and they're all just whack, the craziest noises ever. I got lots of story about mules, but anyway, I would say if you were to say 5 bullet points for training mules, number 1, be patient with them. Just realize they're not horses. You got to think about everything. Just outthink them, come up with a way to treat them that you'll get what you want. Number 2, they love treats. Always try to find a way to get into their mouth with what you're training. Find a way to get treats to them. Number 3, relationships. Build relationships. If you find the place they like to be scratched, scratch it. If they don't like messed with their ears this way, rather than beat them through it, mess with their ears the other way. Try 3 or 4 options. At the end of the day, you got to get stuff done. And I won't tell you that I'm entirely patient with mules, because when I know a mule has to be burned through an experience because he's never going to come to it, we do it the same as we do with a horse. But I always try several options first with a mule to see if I can't get there a different way. Remember, you can catch more flies with honey than you can vinegar. That's what my grandpa used to say. Third or fourth, I would say pay attention to the fact that mules are always communicating. So they get tired on the trail. A horse will go until he literally blows a lung. He'll keep going just because he's got a great work ethic. When a mule stops, you'll see people start to beat on that mule. To a point, you can encourage them, but if you find that they've just stopped and you're whooping on them and they're doing nothing, it is time to stop and look at 2 things. Either your gear is wrong, because if a mule's packed lopsided and he stops, he knows he's got a Dutch oven pan lid banging him in the ribs and it's giving him a sore, he'll just stop. I don't know how many times I've had a mule seize up on me, go back there, repack the outfit, 5-6 pounds different that was wrong. Take the lead rope and he goes right off the rest of the day, no problem. If he's got something gouging him, he'll stop. If he's just tired and he knows he's going to hurt himself, he'll stop. And rather than whack on him, listen to him. Most of the time, they've got a great reason for stopping. So that, and then maybe the 5th one, I would say with mules, is be conscious of the fact that they do not forget and they do not forgive very fast. And so if you decide you just want to be a macho cowboy and you're going to beat the bejeebus out of your mule and get him where you want him to go, you can do it. You can beat a mule into doing things. I could tell you a man that used to use chains and bars and every imaginable thing to beat mules, and his mules were behaved, but they didn't come to him when he called them. And if they had any opportunity at all to get gone, they'd get gone. He had a devil of a time keeping track of his mules. He always had them hobbled and chained and tied. But if they were ever set free, they didn't want him. You know the old poem, if you love something, let it go. If it comes back to you, it's yours forever. If it doesn't, it never was. Try that with a mule. See that horse down there? He's not tied to anything. He's just sitting there. See that horse up there? He's not tied to anything. He's just sitting there. Do our horses like us? Well, they obviously aren't terrified of us, because we're going to walk right over, get on our horse, ride out of here, find a pack horse, pack these horns off. And lastly, about a mule, there's another saying: a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Mules are precisely that embodied. Mules, if you make them do it, they will do it. But until you make it their idea, until you convince them that it's the better way to go, they're not going to do it on their own. They will maintain their opinion of that little exercise, and you'll be doing it again every time. Mules are not stubborn. They're just different. And when they decide it's a no-go, it's a big problem. And like I say, the best thing to do is try and convince them of it. And then lastly, because mules, once you get a mule in shape, let's say you're feeding it 2 gallons of whole oats in the morning, and then you're riding it and you're giving another 2 gallons of whole oats at night. That's a lot of oats for a mule. And I wouldn't recommend that just feeding them in your corral or your pasture. But if you're using them, they'll eat that, they'll burn that, and they'll use that. A mule can almost entirely exist on that kind of feed. On the trail, when we're packing long ways, we just feed them whole oats, a little grass as they go. They'll stay fat, they'll stay shiny. Every day, they'll be just the same condition. They can go again. The horses, you'll see there, they start to deplete. Long trips start to take them down to where there's less of them and less of them until they're losing weight. You can't keep weight on them. That mule will look just as good as it can be. Now, here's the thing that Brigham Young learned. After 10 years of watching those wagon trains come in and looking at the condition of the animals every time, he changed his mind. And people will say, hey, do you have proof of that? And I say, well, yeah. When the Martin Willie Handcart Company got stuck on the plains of Wyoming, they were dying. I don't remember how many hundred died, but there was like 400 people out there. Anyway, Brigham Young came to the pulpit at church in Salt Lake City, and he just received a report of these people, their condition. They were in, I can't remember, the snow was way over 4 feet. I think it was 8 feet in some places. People were dying. There was no food. The animals were dying. It was a really bad situation. Brigham Young came to the pulpit, and you can look this up. I think it's in the Journal of Discourses, but it's in a lot of history places. And he says, we're not going to sit here and have church and worship our God while our brothers and sisters are dying out there and we're doing nothing. So whatever we have to do, we're going after them. He says, I'm dismissing this meeting, and I am calling for 20 mule teams. Now, did you hear that? The man who wouldn't have any mules in his wagon train coming west, as soon as he found out, this is in 57, so this is 10 years later, he learned something, guaranteed, because he didn't call for horse teams. And all the movies you see depicting it, there's horses, and I'm just like, well, that didn't make any sense. He says, I want 20 mule teams assembled and back here by 10 o'clock in the morning, outfitted with food and blankets and whatever. We're going after them. And they went out and rescued their brothers and sisters on the plain who had been praying. And here come these mules bucking snowdrifts clear to their chins. And they got through that snow, and they saved those people. And Brigham Young knew he needed mules for that mission. So I have inferred that he learned that. I had one guy told that to. He says, no, mules. Brigham still hated mules, and he thought they were all going to die, so he sent mules in hopes to get rid of everything. No, he wanted to save those people, and he knew that mules could do it. So, bottom line, in my corral, I have everything. I probably have 24 mules total. I have a dozen maybe that I use. I raise them. I breed them. I've trained hundreds of them. I sell a lot of them. This month I'll probably sell 3-4 mules, and every month I sell a couple of mules. I make them, I break them, and train them and get them gone. But people say, which do you like the best? Why don't you ride a mule all the time? Well, sometimes I want to go like I'm on a magic carpet ride to the top of the mountain, and I just go flying up there on a thoroughbred horse going 9-0, and I'm going to go all day, and I like the feel of a big moving horse. I don't want a mule. Sometimes I will go up in some ledges, and I'm going to be grinding around in rocks and hunting cougars or looking for elk or hauling elk off a mountain. I wouldn't think of taking anything but a mule, because that mule's going to haul that elk, most of it by himself, and he's going to tiptoe down through those rocks, and he's going to jump off of 4-foot ledges and up onto 4-foot ledges, and his pack's going to be fine. They move just like a goat. They're more like a goat than they are a horse. But here's a little caveat. Mules will get out of bad pens. Mules will undo latches. They're like having a cross between a monkey and a parrot when it comes to keeping them in places. They'll chew everything. They'll screw around with everything. They'll eat wood, whether they got feed standing in their feed manger, and they'll go chew a post down because it's something to grind their teeth on. They're weird that way. And they once learn how to open a gate, you'll have to chain it and lock it. They can jump most fences. You watch these guys that hunt coons down in the south, you'll never see them riding a horse, ever. Even those cracker horse places down in Florida, it's a cracker horse mule. And because they can throw their jacket on a 5-foot fence, tell the mule jump the jacket, and it'll jump that jacket, and they can keep hunting coons through pasture after pasture. You get there on a horse, you're done. First fence, you stop. Mules will just flat foot jump 5-6 feet, and I show it to you all day long. Probably it's on the internet. They're amazing at what they can jump, amazing at what they'll cross. I've been on mules before crossing canyons, no way to get through the canyon, rushing water underneath. I watched a mule one time named Festus, a little buckskin mule we raised. We had to get up to this place on the Tusher Mountains. There was a log about that big around. And I thought, this is something no one ought to ever do, but I'm going to try it. I got up on that log and I walked across it. And it was quite a little balancing act for me to get across it. And I was at the end of about a 12-foot lead rope. And I said, Festus, he jumped up on that log and he crossed that log with his nose just about touching it, just like a cat. walked across that canyon that was blowing through with floodwaters, walked across the log, got on the trail. I was the only man that day that went up there. There was, in the teens, there was 10, 12, maybe 15 of us that were on that ride. None of them got there. They had to go some other place. They never got there. Festus and I got there. That day I was mules are way cooler than horses. But then, you know, every day you learn a little something that makes you go one way or the other. This is my belief. People ask me all the time. I'm sure this is going to spawn a question if somebody gets it. I'm answering this question because somebody on the YouTube asked this kid, what's better, or what are the differences between horses and mules? What are the pros and cons? I think I've covered most of those. But always remember that your corral, if you can afford it, and if it's your lifestyle, should be more like a toolbox with tools in it. A mule is a tool, and use it for what it's for, and you'll always be happy. Even amongst horses, if I want to go in a pen and cut back and forth and jerk calves to the branding fire, a quarter horse is what I would ride, and it's what I would use, and it's what they're bred for. But I want to go out in this country and these trails, and I've got to go all day, and I've got to go maybe 40, 50 miles. I would not have a quarter horse under me. They have a big engine. They're a drag racing car. They're made for a 0 to 60. They are a quarter horse because they run a quarter mile. 340 yards is a great place to ride a quarter horse. But you get beyond that, you're going to find yourself on a rougher ride, on a slower horse, dealing with heat building up in their muscles, lactic acid, breakdowns, failures, tired, fatigue. You're not going to experience that with a mule. That mule, once he's in shape, can go all day long, and he can do all kinds of things. And I know lots of guys that'll brand with a mule. They use a mule just like you use a quarter horse, and they do great with them. But, you know, you wouldn't take a hammer and try and twist a screw out of a wall. It wouldn't work. And you wouldn't use a screwdriver to try and pound a nail. Different tools, different uses. If you're going to be a trail rider, you're going to look for a gaited horse with some go and some distance. Because you're riding trails. If you're going to rope and brand cows, you're going to look for a quarter horse probably. But if you're going to pack, deal with dudes, go up and down in ledges, I could go on and on about the criteria. You will not do better than a well-bred mule. Now, last thing I'm going to tell you about mules. To get a good mule, you got to get a good mare and a good jack. In the old days, the reason mules got a bad name and why they were all so ugly is the ranchers would turn their good stallion in with their broodmare band. The good stallion would breed all the good mares. But if you had a mare that was a witch and wouldn't take the stallion, or was just too poor and too ugly and whatever, they wouldn't catch colt, right? So after they pull the good stallion out, they'd throw a jackass in there, because a jackass will, and I have seen them do it, grab a mare by the throat, throw her on her back, and breed her missionary style in a ditch. They will get that mare bred. And the semen on a jackass is less viscous than the semen on a horse. And so for those hard to catch mares, that thinner fluid the swimmers get there. And I imagine the little swimmers are like the mules, the jacks. They can get places horses can't get, because you'll catch those hard to catch mares. They'll catch to a jack when they won't catch to a horse. So anyway, in the old times, that's why you had such crappy mules, because all the good mares caught to the good horses. And then the cleanup crew, which was the jackass, bred all the nasty mares, and they had the babies that were nasty out of nasty mares. So you got these ornery, kicky, ill-tempered mule. Well, it's just a mule. We're just going to pack on it. Who cares? But not in this day and age. In this day and age where mules go for $60,000 at a good mule sale, Jake Clark mule sale, go up there and see if you're going to touch a good mule for less than $25,000. You won't do it, because they're taking top quality mares to top quality jacks that have been selectively bred. You go to Bishop Mule Days and look at those mules. They don't just fall off the turnip truck and find a donkey and throw it with a mare. They breed select mares to select jacks, and they get these awesome mules, and then they bring them to me, and I train them. And then I get to ride way better stock. You should see the mules I ride today compared to what I was breaking when I was a teenager. When I used to get a mule as a teenager, I'd go, oh, crap. Mom, I'm going to have, get Band-Aids, get medicine, be on call. I'm going to break this mule. And she'd go, no, don't break any more mules. They tore me up. They kicked me up. They bit me. I thought, why would anybody want a mule? Well, they brought me trashy mules because in those days, most people had trashy mules. Today, they bring me, oh, geez, I can't even tell you, some of the top bred horses in the country, and then they go to a jack that is long-necked, pretty-headed, good-footed, good back. They really pay attention to the jack stock that they breed. You go through the Midwest, you can buy in Texas, Missouri, good jack stock with really reputable breeders. You buy a jack there and cover decent mares, you'll put out mules that you'll wonder why you ever rode anything else. I've got one up there right now that I can't wait to ride. I got 3 at home that I can't wait to break because I know they're just going to be music to ride. And that's the felicity. That's that experience you're looking for on a mule. But it takes good mares and good jacks to make good mules. I think I've said plenty about mules. Anybody who sees this and wants to know more, just ask a specific question because I can probably answer it. I've probably got a scar to show you for every answer too. All right, let's get out of this canyon before it snows.